She spat on my family's legacy and threw our engagement ring in my face. My fiancée just watched. So I destroyed their world, and the fallout was biblical. My dad used to say that you can tell the character of a man by the way he treats his tools and his wood. He wasn't a philosopher, just a factory man from Ohio who spent 40 years of his life at a steel mill. He'd come home smelling of grease and metal, his hands calloused and scarred, but he'd always have this quiet pride. They can take your job, but they can't take the pride in what you build with your own two hands. He told me the day his plant finally shut down, leaving him with a modest pension and a lifetime of memories. That lesson stuck with me more than anything I ever learned in school. It's why I do what I do. My name is Caleb. I'm 32, and I'm a furniture maker. I don't mean the flat-pack stuff you assemble with an Allen key. I mean real, solid wood. I have a small workshop on the edge of town, a place that perpetually smells of sawdust and varnish. I love the grain of fresh-cut piece of oak, the heft of black walnut, the way you can take something raw and flawed and, with patience and skill, turn it into something strong, beautiful, and lasting. Something with character. I met Alara at a local arts fair on a sweltering July afternoon. I was there half-heartedly hawking a few of my smaller pieces, end tables, sculpted bowls, that sort of thing. I was about ready to pack it in when she appeared. She wasn't loud or flashy. She moved with a kind of gentle grace, her eyes taking in everything with a genuine curiosity. She stopped at my booth, her fingers tracing the dovetail joints on a cherrywood chest I'd spent the better part of a month on. "You made this?" she asked, her voice soft. "Every piece of it," I said. She looked up at me, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Her eyes were a deep, thoughtful hazel. "It's honest," she said, and I knew she understood. She didn't talk about the price or how it would match her sofa. She talked about the honesty of the work. Her name was Alara. She was an artist, too, a painter who worked a soulless accounting job to pay the bills. We talked for an hour about the integrity of materials, about the struggle to create something real in a world full of disposable things. By the time the fair was closing, I had her number and a feeling I hadn't had in a long, long time. Our relationship grew like a well-tended sapling. It was easy, natural. We connected on a level that felt fundamental. I loved her creative soul, the way her face would light up when she talked about a new color palette she was experimenting with. She loved the quiet solidity of my world, the way I found purpose in making things that would outlive me. But there was always a shadow. Her mother, Linda. The first time I met her parents, I felt like I was walking into an audition. Their house was immaculate, a sterile monument to good taste, but it had no soul. It was filled with expensive things that felt like they were chosen from a catalog, not from the heart. Linda was polished and polite, but her eyes were like a hawk's, scanning me for weaknesses. Her husband, Robert, was a quiet, faded man who seemed to exist only in her periphery. "Caleb makes furniture," Alara said brightly. "Oh, how lovely." "A hobby," Linda replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's my profession," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Of course," she said. "But what's your 5-year plan?" "Art is wonderfully romantic, but it doesn't pay the bills, does it?" I felt Alara's hand find mine under the table, her grip tight. She was apologizing with her silence. I let it go. For her. After 2 years, despite the constant, subtle digs from Linda, I knew I wanted to marry Alara. I loved her enough to believe we could build a fortress against her mother's influence. I decided to propose. I didn't go to a jewelry store. My grandmother had left me her engagement ring, a simple, elegant piece from the 1950s with a beautiful diamond solitaire. It wasn't a giant rock, but it was brimming with history, a symbol of a love that had lasted 60 years. It was real. I took it to a quiet, old-world jeweler downtown, a man with a magnifying glass permanently attached to his eye, and had him clean it and resize it. He admired the craftsmanship, the honesty of the piece. But that wasn't my only contribution. I spent a week in my workshop on a secret project. I took a block of the finest black walnut, the kind with a deep, swirling grain that felt alive under my hands. I hollowed it out, sanded it until it was as smooth as river stone, and crafted a small, perfect box. I lined it with dark green velvet. This was my part of the proposal. My skill, my heart, joined with my family's past. I proposed to her in the workshop, surrounded by the scent of wood and the ghosts of all the things I'd ever created. When I opened the small walnut box, her eyes filled with tears. "The ring is my family's past," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This box, made for you, is our future." She said yes before I even finished the question. For a few days, everything was perfect. We were in our own little world, a world where her mother didn't exist. Then she did. "We should have an engagement party," Alara said one evening, a few days later. I noticed she was fidgeting with her phone, a telltale sign she'd just been talking to Linda. "At my parents' house. Mom thinks it would be a wonderful way to announce it to everyone. She wants to feel involved." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I thought we'd just tell people. "Keep it simple. Please, Caleb? For me?" she asked, her voice pleading. It would make her so happy. I looked at the woman I loved, and I caved. It was a mistake, and a deep, primal part of me knew it. I called my older brother, Mark, to tell him the news. He was happy for me, but when I told him about the party, he went quiet. "You're walking into the lion's den, little brother," he said. "Just keep your head on a swivel." He was right. I was willingly stepping into the cage, armed with nothing but a foolish hope that love would be enough to tame the beast. The party felt wrong from the moment we walked in. The air in Linda's house was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and quiet judgment. It wasn't a celebration, it was a stage, and Linda was the director. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt as cold as marble, her eyes immediately flicking down to Alara's hand, where my grandmother's ring sat. She didn't comment on it, not yet. She was saving it. My brother Mark and his wife, Sarah, arrived, and I felt a wave of relief. Mark was my anchor to reality. He was a contractor, a man who dealt in foundations and load-bearing walls. He could spot a structural weakness from a mile away, in a house or in a person. He gave me a look that said, "I'm here if you need me," and went to get a beer. Linda was in her element, flitting between guests, her voice a tinkling bell of social grace. Then she brought a man over to us. "Caleb, I don't believe you've met Julian Vance," she said. "Julian is a very dear friend of the family." Julian was tall, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my truck, and had a smile that was all teeth. He shook my hand, his grip a little too firm, his eyes lingering on Alara a little too long. "A pleasure," he said, his voice smooth as polished granite. "Linda has told me so much about your craft." The word hung in the air, loaded with condescension. He engaged Alara in a conversation about a recent art gala in New York, a world away from the local fairs where she and I had met. I watched Linda watch them, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Julian was her plan B. I was the placeholder, the blue-collar amusement she was tolerating until something better came along. I felt a slow burn of anger start deep in my gut. I excused myself and found Alara's father, Robert, by the bar, nursing a scotch. He looked smaller, more faded than usual, under the bright lights of his own home. "Congratulations, son," he mumbled, not quite meeting my eye. "Thanks, Robert. It's quite a party." He took a long swallow of his drink. "Linda just wants the best for her," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Sometimes she tries too hard." He looked at me for a brief, fleeting moment, and in his eyes I saw a profound, bottomless exhaustion. He was a man who had surrendered decades ago. Later, I was standing with Mark when I overheard a snippet of conversation. It was Linda, her back to me, her voice a low, stressed whisper into her phone. "I don't care what the estimate was. The final bill is unacceptable. No, the club fees are a separate issue entirely." It was a tiny crack in the flawless facade, a glimpse of the desperation churning beneath the surface. It wasn't about wealth. It was about the appearance of wealth. And then, the main event began. Linda clinked a glass with a spoon, the sound silencing the room. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, beaming. "As you all know, we're here to celebrate my darling Alara and her engagement to Caleb." She paused, letting the polite applause die down. "Alara, darling, come here. Show everyone the beautiful ring." A sense of dread washed over me. This was it. The moment the trap was sprung, Alara looked at me, a flicker of panic in her eyes, but she walked obediently to her mother's side. She held up her hand, a little shyly. The diamond caught the light, a single pure spark. Linda took Alara's hand, turning it over as if inspecting a curious but cheap trinket. She held it up for everyone to see. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "This is it. It's very quaint." The word, quaint, landed like a stone in the silent room. It was a dismissal, a pat on the head to a child who had tried his best. I felt Mark tense up beside me. I kept my face a mask of calm. "It was my grandmother's," I said, my voice steady and clear enough for the whole room to hear. "It has a lot of history." Linda let out a small, tinkling laugh. "History doesn't pay for a mortgage, Caleb," she said, her eyes glinting with malice. Now, she turned her attention fully to me, the predator cornering her prey. In fact, I was so curious about its provenance that I asked Julian to have a look at it earlier. "He knows about these things," he said. "Well, let's just say its sentimental value is all it has." My blood ran cold. She'd had it appraised. Behind my back, before the party. The premeditation of it all was staggering. Alara looked horrified. "Mom, don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Linda was relentless. This was her closing argument. She gently slid the ring off Alara's unresisting finger. She held it between her thumb and forefinger, like one might hold a dead insect. "I just want to be sure my daughter is in good hands," Linda continued, her voice resonating with false concern. She looked directly at me, her smile a cruel slash. "I need to know what a man is truly worth." Then, with a final, devastating flourish, she turned to me. "This is what your family's legacy is worth." She didn't throw it. That would have been too crude. Instead, she let it drop from her fingers. It was a conscious, deliberate act of release. The ring hit the polished marble floor. Clink. The sound was small, but it echoed in the dead silence of the room like a gunshot. It was the sound of a line being crossed. The sound of something breaking forever. Every eye in the room was on that tiny, sparkling object on the floor. And then they turned to me. I didn't look at them. I didn't look at Linda. I looked at Alara. She stood frozen, a statue of indecision. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly open in a silent O of shock. She looked from her mother to the ring on the floor and then to me. Her eyes were wide with a helpless, terrified plea. But she said nothing, not a single word. She didn't rush to pick it up. She didn't tell her mother she had gone too far. She didn't move. Her silence was louder than her mother's cruelty. Her silence was a choice. Her silence was my answer. The world seemed to move in slow motion. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the breathing of 30 people in a room holding a collective breath. Slowly, deliberately, I walked forward. I didn't push past anyone. I simply moved into the center of the room until I was standing over the ring. I bent down, my knees cracking slightly, and picked it up. It felt cold in my palm. I straightened up. I didn't look at Linda. I didn't need to. Her part in this was over. I looked directly into Alara's tear-filled eyes. The anger inside me had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it carried across the silent room. "I needed to see who you would choose, Alara," I said, my gaze unwavering. "Your mother or us?" I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "I have my answer." I closed my hand around the ring, the metal pressing into my palm. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to my brother. Then I turned and walked out of the room. I walked down the hall, past the soulless art and the perfectly arranged furniture. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the cool night air. Behind me, I heard Alara's voice, finally breaking free, a desperate cry. "Caleb, wait." I didn't wait. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, the front door closing behind me with a soft, final click. The drive home was a blur. My phone started buzzing in my pocket almost immediately, but I ignored it. When I got back to my apartment, I tossed my keys on the counter and finally pulled it out. 14 missed calls from Alara. A string of frantic texts. "Caleb, please come back. I'm so sorry. Mom didn't mean it like that. Please, we can fix this." She was just worried about me. I stared at the last message. She was just worried about me. Even now, after that public execution, Alara was still making excuses for her. She was still filtering the world through the lens of her mother's approval. I powered the phone off and dropped on the couch. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. It was Mark. He didn't say anything, just walked in, went to my fridge, grabbed 2 beers, and handed one to me. "You okay?" he finally asked, slumping into a chair. "No," I said honestly, taking a long pull from the bottle. "But I will be." "You did the right thing," he said. His voice was firm, no room for pity. "That woman's a black widow, man. And the other one, she just let you get eaten. You dodged a bullet. A big, gold-digging, diamond-encrusted bullet." He was right, but it didn't stop the ache in my chest. This wasn't just a dodged bullet. This was an amputation. I had to cut off a part of myself to survive. The next few days were quiet. I kept my phone off. I didn't want to hear the apologies, the justifications, the pleas. I needed silence. I went to my workshop, thinking the familiar routine of planing wood and cutting joints would soothe me. But it didn't. I stood there for hours, surrounded by the tools of my trade, the smell of cedar and pine filling my lungs, and I felt nothing, no desire to create. I looked over at a half-finished bookshelf in the corner. I had started it last week. It was for our future home. I'd imagined Alara's art books lining its shelves, her paints and brushes stored in the small cabinets at the bottom. Now it just looked like a pile of wood, a monument to a future that had been canceled. The grief hit me, then a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. It was the loss of her, yes, but it was also the loss of the man I was when I was with her, hopeful, building, planning. Linda hadn't just taken a ring. She had taken a future. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jenna, Alara's cousin. She was one of the few people in that family who seemed to have a moral compass. "Caleb, it's Jenna. I'm so sorry for what happened." "It's not your fault, Jenna. Thanks for calling." "Listen," she said, her voice low. "I thought you should know what's going on here. It's ugly. Linda is on a full-blown smear campaign. She's telling everyone you have a temper, that you're financially unstable, and that you stormed out because you were embarrassed by your own cheapness. She's painting herself as the heroic mother who saved her daughter from a disastrous mistake." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Of course she is. She can't stand that someone stood up to her. She has to be the victim. Exactly. I thought you should know. Don't believe anything you hear. After that call, I knew I had to see Alara one last time. Not to fix things, but to formally end them. To close the book. She came to the workshop. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered, standing awkwardly in the middle of the sawdust-covered floor. "What do you want, Alara?" I asked. My voice was gentle but firm. "I want to apologize," she said, tears immediately welling up. I was a coward. I know that. I just froze. It's what I always do around her. "I know. I love you, Caleb. I love you so much. Please don't let her win. Don't let her destroy us." That's when I saw the fundamental flaw in her thinking. She still saw this as a battle against her mother. She didn't understand that the battle had been for her, and she had surrendered without a fight. I took a deep breath. "The problem isn't your mother, Alara. Not really. The problem is that you let her win. You stood there and watched her spit on my family, on me, on us. Your silence was your choice." "I know," she cried out, and for the first time, I saw a flash of anger. Not at me, but at herself. "Don't you think I know I'm a coward? I hate myself for it. I hate it. But when she looks at me, I become a little girl again, and I'm so scared of disappointing her." Her confession was heartbreaking, but it didn't change the facts. "I love you, Alara. A part of me probably always will," I said, and it was the honest truth. "But I can't live like this. I can't spend the rest of my life fighting a two-front war, one against your mother and another one just to get you to stand by my side." I walked over to my workbench, the place where I made things strong and true. "I need a partner, a real partner, someone who has my back, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She looked at me, her face streaked with tears, hope dwindling in her eyes. "What can I do? Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." And there it was again, asking to be told what to do. I shook my head sadly. That's the point, Alara. I can't tell you. I need a partner who can stand on her own 2 feet, who can choose us without me having to beg for it. I can't tell you how to do that. That's your journey to take, your mountain to climb. I paused, the finality of my words hanging in the air between us. But I can't be with you until you've taken it. And I can't wait at the bottom for you. I have to save myself. She finally understood. The fight went out of her, replaced by a deep, shuddering sob of acceptance. She knew it was over. A few days after that, I was at the hardware store, picking up some linseed oil. I was in one of the back aisles when I heard a hesitant voice. Caleb. I turned. It was Robert. He looked even more diminished without the grand backdrop of his home. He was just a tired old man in a polo shirt. Robert, I said, nodding. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a display of drill bits as he spoke. I saw what she did, he mumbled. At the party. I'm sorry. It's done now. She'll never let Alara go, you know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. She still helps her out. With money. Keeps her close. It's how I haven't been strong for a long time. For either of them. He wasn't confessing to me. He was confessing to himself, out loud, for the first time. He was telling me that Linda's control wasn't just psychological. It was a financial prison, and he was one of the jailers. Run, son, he said, his voice cracking. It's the kindest thing you can do for yourself. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the aisle with the smell of motor oil and the cold, hard truth. There was no hope. There never had been. The next 8 months were about rebuilding. Not a bookshelf, but my life. I threw myself into my work with a singular focus I hadn't had before. I took on more ambitious projects, pushed my own creative boundaries. My workshop became my sanctuary again, a place of healing and creation. I worked the grief and anger out of my system with saws and sandpaper, and slowly I began to feel whole again. The news came, as it always did, through Jenna. She called me one afternoon in the late spring. Hey, stranger, she said. Just thought I'd let you know, so you don't have to hear it from someone else. Let me guess, I said, leaning against my workbench. She's with Julian. There was a pause. Yeah, they made it official last month. Linda is over the moon. She's already talking about venues for the wedding. I felt a pang, but it wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain of before. It was a dull, distant ache, like a memory of an old wound. Is she happy? I asked. Jenna sighed. She looks the part. She has the expensive clothes, goes to the fancy dinners. But when you look in her eyes, Caleb, there's nothing there. The lights are on, but nobody's home. She made her choice, I said, more to myself than to Jenna. She took the easy path, Jenna corrected. That's not the same as making a choice. We talked for a few more minutes and then hung up. I stood there for a long time, looking at the grain of a piece of maple I was working on. Jenna was right. Alara hadn't chosen a life. She had accepted a sentence. A comfortable, well-decorated prison, but a prison nonetheless. I felt a profound sense of pity for her, and for the first time, I felt truly free. The final act of closure came a few weeks later. I was downtown for a meeting with a client, an architect who wanted to commission some pieces for a new hotel. It was a big step for me. As I was leaving, I glanced across the street at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. And there they were, on the patio, seated at a small table. Linda, looking triumphant. Julian, looking smug. And Alara. She was wearing a silk dress that must have cost a fortune, her hair perfectly styled. She looked like a photograph from a magazine. A beautiful, sad, empty photograph. As I watched, Julian said something that made Linda laugh. That tinkling, false laugh I remembered so well. Alara just smiled, a small, polite, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then, as if she felt my gaze, her head turned. Her eyes scanned the street and locked with mine. The world fell away. For a single, stretched-out moment, there was just the two of us, separated by a river of traffic and a universe of different choices. I saw it all in her eyes, the regret, the apology, the ghost of the life we were supposed to have. The woman I fell in love with was still in there, trapped behind the silk and the hollow smile. I didn't smile back. I didn't scowl. I just held her gaze for a second longer and gave a single, slow nod. It was an acknowledgement. A farewell, a final closing of the book. Then I turned and walked away, not looking back. I had a meeting to get to. I had work to do. I had a life to build. My dad was right. Character is about what you build. You can't build something strong and beautiful on a rotten foundation. Some wood is just too warped to save, twisted by forces beyond your control. The hardest, most important lesson isn't about joining the pieces together. It's about knowing when to walk away and start fresh with a new piece, one that's honest, strong, and true, all the way through.